2 Chronicles chapter 24 and the life of Joash. But as you're turning there, go ahead and turn to 2 Chronicles chapter 22 so that we can get some of the context here before we start. So 2 Chronicles chapter 24 is kind of a monotonous cadence of rising and falling spirituality among the leaders of Judah and Israel. It's that part in the Bible where you probably hear, oh, this king's doing really well, and then his son doesn't do well, and then his son does well, and it goes back and forth. Jehoshaphat, Joash's grandfather, sought the Lord with all his heart. Kind of tracing a family tree here. We're going to be focusing on the life of Joash, but his grandfather, Jehoshaphat, sought the Lord with all his heart. Then Jehoshaphat's son is Jehoram. And Jehoram allied himself with the wicked king Ahab. Any alliance with Ahab often ended in disaster. But so much so that he allied himself by marrying his daughter, Ahab's daughter, which was the wicked Athaliah. And now Jehoram, so you got Jehoshaphat, Jehoram, and now you've got Ahaziah, his son. Ahaziah was killed because of that alliance in war, because of Ahab and that association there. But once Athaliah had passed away, once Ahaziah had passed away, Athaliah, his mother, now had no heir. She had nobody that she could be in control over or power over, so she decided to try to wipe out that whole line. And this is the line of David, and God has very specific promises about what is going to happen in the line of David, and that's going to continue. Well, the wicked queen, now Athaliah, takes power and tries to wipe out that whole line so that she can have the power, basically. So that's where we're diving in. Look with me at 2 Chronicles chapter 22, we're going to start at verse 10. And I actually like to read the rest of 22, and we're going to go ahead and read through chapter 23. It's a little longer of a reading, but I think this is important to get the context of where this story is going. And then we'll land in chapter 24. Verse 10 says, "Now when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she arose and destroyed all the royal family of the house of Judah. But Jehoshabeth, the daughter of the king, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him away from among the king's sons who were about to be put to death. And she put him and his nurse in a bedroom. Thus Jehoshabeth, the daughter of King Jehoram, and wife of Jehoiada the priest, because she was a sister of Ahaziah, hid him from Athaliah, so that she did not put him to death. And he remained with them 6 years, hidden in the house of God, while Athaliah reigned over the land." And now chapter 23. "But in the 7th year, Jehoiada took courage and entered into a covenant with the commanders of hundreds, Azariah, the son of Jehoram, Ishmael, the son of Jehohanan, Azariah, the son of Obed, Maaseiah, the son of Ediah, and Elishaphat, the son of Zichri. And they went about through Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah, the heads of fathers' houses of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. And all the assembly made a covenant with the king in the house of God. And Jehoiada said to them, 'Behold, the king's son, let him reign, as the Lord spoke concerning the sons of David. This is the thing that you should hear. You bring the Levites to come off duty on the Sabbath, 1/3 till the gate, 1/3 till we have the king's house, and 1/3 to the gate of the foundation. And all the people shall be in the courts of the house of the Lord. Let no one enter the house of the Lord except the priests and ministering Levites. They may enter, for they are holy, but all the people shall keep the charge of the Lord. The Levites shall surround the king, each with his weapons in hand, and whoever enters the house shall be put to death, but with the king when he comes in and when he goes out.' The Levites and all Judah did according to all that Jehoiada the priest commanded, and they each brought his men, who were to go off duty on the Sabbath, with those who were to come on duty on the Sabbath, for Jehoiada the priest did not dismiss the divisions. And Jehoiada the priest gave to the captains the spears and the large and small shields that had been given to King David, which were in the house of God. And he set all the people as a guard for the king, every man with his weapons in hand, from the south side of the house to the north side of the house, around the altar and the house. Then they brought out the king's son, this is Joash, and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. And they proclaimed him king. And Jehoiada and his sons anointed him, and they said, 'Long live the king.' When Athaliah heard the noise of the people running and praising the king,
She went into the house of the Lord to the people, and when she looked, there was the king standing by his pillar at the entrance, and the captains and the trumpeters beside the king. And all the people of the land rejoiced, and blowing trumpets, and the singers with their musical instruments leading in the celebration. And Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason, treason!" Then Jehoiada the priest brought out the captains who were set over the army, saying to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, and anyone who follows her is to be put to death with the sword." For the priest said, "Do not let her be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they laid hands on her, and she went into the entrance of the horse gate of the king's house, and there they put her to death. And Jehoiada made a covenant between himself and all the people, and the king, that they should be the Lord's people. Then all the people went to the house of Baal and tore it down. His altars and his images they broke in pieces, and they killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And Jehoiada posted watchmen for the house of the Lord under the direction of the Levitical priests and the Levites, whom David had organized to be in charge of the house of the Lord, to offer burnt offerings to the Lord, as it is written in the law of Moses, with rejoicing and with singing, according to the order of David. He stationed the gatekeepers at the gates of the house of the Lord, so that no one should enter who was in any way unclean. And he took captains, the nobles, the governors of the people, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, marching through the upper gate to the king's house. And they set the king on the royal throne. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the king and the city was quiet after Athaliah had been put to death with the sword. So Jehoiada's plan worked. It worked. He got this now 6-year-old young Joash and got to set him up as the king, replacing Athaliah and putting her to death because she basically tried to wipe out the whole line of David. So once again, a rightful heir of David has sat on the throne. And this isn't just a return to the line of David, but this is a return to the Lord. The wicked King Ahab and Athaliah, they were worshipers of Baal, but now Jehoiada and now the young Joash are reinstituting worship of Yahweh in the temple. So the idolatry was destroyed, the land experienced a reprieve of peace. Now how would this young, promising heir in the line of David, how would he rule? And that's where we'll pick up in chapter 24. Did you know that by blood, my name is actually not Till? My name is Josh Till, but by blood, Till is not my last name. I am not adopted. My dad is also not adopted, but my grandfather was sort of adopted. So he had a stable mother in his life, but there were several men kind of going in and out of his life. His actual biological father really wanted nothing to do with him, so he didn't want to take that name. Then he had kind of a stepfather, but the stepfather was kind of mean to him, also didn't really want much to do with him, so he also didn't want to take that name. I'm really glad because one of those names was Rude, so I could be Joshua Rude, right there for that. The other name was Harris. I could be Joshua Harris, which if you know the popular book writer and kind of Christian celebrity Joshua Harris, that's not a good thing, and we're going to get there in just a second. But eventually, he was taken under by really what was just no relation to him or his mother, but just a father figure. This father figure, his last name was Till, and this explains so much about me. He was a hunter, so this is how hunting entered the family. But this is also how Christianity entered my family. Till was the one who took him to church and started just realizing this young kid needs some help, and he needed to get around some other believers, and he met a bunch of hunters there, and the hunters in the church kind of all showed him some hunting and mentored him, and really taught him about the Lord, and that's how Christianity entered my family on my dad's side. So I tell that story because just this passage has so much to do with spiritual influence and mentoring, and we're going to talk about that a little more. But also, just because I'm really glad that my name is not Joshua Harris. If you know anything about Joshua Harris, he's a prominent Christian figure. He wrote several books that I read when I was a teen. These are books like, maybe you've heard I Kissed Dating Goodbye. That's probably his most popular. Or Boy Meets Girl, or Not Even a Hint, Those are just three of several books that he read. Especially those three I read when I was in high school. And that really taught me a lot about relationships, when I was, 13 and starting to get interested in girls and just figuring that whole thing out. He taught me from a Christian perspective, from those books, how to navigate all of that. And I was very thankful for that, and I benefited a lot from his books and from his writings. If I didn't know how his story ended up, I would say I have a lot to thank him for, and I'm very grateful for his ministry. But as he went on, he gradually became more and more liberal until eventually Joshua Harris left the faith. And now he's very outspoken about that and kind of resents Christianity for the time he was there. He has his own website, and here kind of posted on the front page of the website is kind of a description of what he's going through at the moment. Here's a quote from his website, kind of giving an update. Joshua Harris says, "I used to have all the answers, chapter and verse. Now I'm happily uncertain, still unfolding and enjoying the wonder and mystery of life. I spent the first 40 years of my life promoting what I now see as narrow, controlling, fear-based religion. Today I'm an advocate for the freedom to change, grow, and walk away from systems and beliefs that no longer fit. I want to see religious and non-religious communities healthier. Stepping outside of rigid religion, I have found there's a lot of room for discovery." And how sad that somebody who was such an influencer in the Christian circle now is saying things like this, and I almost don't understand how he could be part of the Christian community and miss so much of what we're about. And did he have a relationship with God through all this? Well, maybe you know other people like this. He's more well-known because he was a more prominent Christian figure. But I'm sure we all have people in our lives that we knew who grew up in the Christian church and walked away. We call those people apostates. It's kind of seems like a scary label. Well, what is an apostate? Well, apostate comes from a Greek word that means to depart or withdraw. To depart or withdraw. And you'll recognize this in several verses, and these verses will kind of clue us into how the Christian community latched onto this and started describing people that walk away from the faith with this word. 1 Timothy 4:1 says this, "Now the Spirit expressly says that in later times some will depart from the faith." Depart there, that's the word apostate in Greek. Hebrews 3:12, "Take care, brothers, lest there be in any of you an evil, unbelieving heart, leading you to fall away from the living God." Fall away there is the same Greek word, apostate. And so the Christian community has kind of latched on to these words and described people who fall away, who depart from the Christian faith with the term apostate. It's so sad when somebody goes down this path, and how it would be so great if we could recognize when somebody is starting to go down that path. Someone's leaning in the direction of apostasy, and if we could get to them before they reach that point, if we could kind of stop that process. Well, God has given us a case study in the life of Joash so that we can recognize someone who is leaning toward spiritual apostasy. So what can we learn from the life of Joash? Well, you can learn the 8 danger signs of someone who is leaning towards spiritual apostasy. And together, these danger signs form a portrait of an apostle. So first, please look with me at verses 1 through 4, and we'll look at the first danger sign. The first danger sign is this: service for God does not always equal heart for God. And you'll notice these 8 danger signs are split up in kind of 2 halves. The first half of Joash is under the influence of Jehoiada. Jehoiada is a very positive spiritual influence in his life. The second half is under influence of some very foolish friends and peers that he gets himself mixed up with. So the first 4 danger signs are under the influence of Jehoiada, and we'll notice kind of some early danger signs here. Let's look at verses 1 through 4. Joash was 7 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 40 years in Jerusalem. His mother's name was Zibiah of Beersheba, and Joash did what was right in the eyes of the Lord. notice this, all the days of Jehoiada the priest. Jehoiada got for him 2 wives, and he had sons and daughters. After this, Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord. So Joash has things going pretty well for him. Like, he has gotten old enough where he can start taking some ownership of his reign. He has wives now. He can replenish the line. Back then, okay, yes, he gave him 2 wives. That was for the purpose of kind of replenishing the Davidic line where it had almost been snuffed out. They didn't understand God's direction for 1 wife, but back then that's what they did. It was practice that was, God does not condone, but it happened. But the purpose was to kind of replenish the line of David. And it had been over 100 years since the temple had been built. Okay, so think of David and Solomon when they built the first temple. It had been over 100 years. I think it's like 120 years at this point. And so any building that's been around for that long is starting to crumble. It's starting to need some repair. And so Joash, it says it was with his heart, that was his idea, his initiative to repair the house of the Lord. Well, why was Joash initiating the temple restoration? We know from later on that it probably wasn't for the most noble reasons. From the way that Joash's life turned, it probably wasn't because he just had such a heart for God. Probably it was for other reasons, such as just the expectations of those around him. I mean, think about the enormous pressure that was on Joash at this time, okay? I would not want to be in his place. Basically, the whole line of David is almost snuffed out. He's a 6-year-old boy, and he's the last remaining heir. And so they make this whole coup and this plan to set him up on the throne, and now he is on the throne instead of the wicked Queen Athaliah. And they're bringing back the whole people of Israel to the Lord. And now all eyes are on this very young king. It had been several years by now, but he's still very young here. And the eyes are on him. How is he going to lead? And think of the leaders who have a very vested interest in his leadership. I mean, think of the Levites and the priests, Jehoiada, who risked their lives so that Joash could be in this position. I'm sure they have a very vested interest in how Joash leads. I'm sure they are letting him know that they would like things done, to the temple. And there's probably all this just spiritual pressure to do the right things, to be the right kind of king. And that's a hard position to be in. So it may be expectations from other people. It may be the desire for power. He finally gets to get out of the shadow of Jehoiada and do something on his own, something that gets him recognized. It could be popularity. He wants to do something to be seen as a good king because that's what everybody expects from him, right? Well, as we look at danger signs of somebody leaning towards an apostate, this is the first one. Service for God does not always equal heart for God. This is true in Joash's life. He did some really good things. He had a good initiative here to restore the house of the Lord. That needed to be done. But, as we'll see later on, it didn't necessarily mean that he had a heart for God. So this is that person, now in our day, who is involved in ministries in the church. They might look very spiritual on the outside. They may even have a thriving ministry. You may look at them in church and say, wow, they're doing something so good. But we never know the heart. And we have to watch out for that. Well, danger sign number 2. He cuts corners to get what he wants. All right, look with me at verse 5. Verse 5 says, "And he, Joash, gathered the priests and the Levites and said to them, 'Go out to the cities of Judah and gather from all Israel money to repair the house of your God from year to year, and see that you act quickly.' But the Levites did not act quickly." So they're coming up with this massive project to repair the temple of the Lord. They need funds for that. So Joash instates like this whole plan for how they're going to raise the funds. But the Levites hesitate. Now that should send up red flags. Why are the Levites hesitating? These are the same Levites that risked their neck so that Joash could be in this spot. These are the Levites that have given so much and have a very vested interest in the temple. Like the Levites were the ones dedicated directly to temple work. Why would they hesitate at the thought of repairing the temple? Well, there's several reasons they might have hesitated. One of them is that precedence leads them to assume that the king should pay for temple repairs out of the royal treasury. Okay, this is what David did. All right, David, before his son Solomon built the temple, he just accrued all this wealth. He gathered gold and all the resources he would need to build the temple, and David himself paid for it out of his own royal treasury. He did not go to the people and say, you all need to bring your offerings. I'm not sure if that was Joash's, maybe the royal treasury was just lacking because of the wicked Queen Athaliah had depleted it, or maybe it was selfish reasons. He didn't want to give of his own money. Well, why else would the Levites hesitate? It could be lack of communication from the king until later. Really, the king is asking the Levites to do something somewhat awkward. It would be almost on the level of, think of Pastor Fredette and I, instead of all giving your offerings in the offering plate or in the box, what if we went and knocked on your all's doors and said, all right, it's time for the offering. Like, I wouldn't want to do that, He's putting these Levites in an awkward position of almost canvassing for this offering. Well, the last reason, I think one of the biggest reasons, is that there are actually three ways to fund this project. And you're only going to know this if you look at the parallel passage in 2 Kings 12. You can turn there if you'd like. I'm going to explain it. But at least put this in your notes or in the margin of your Bible. 2 Kings 12 is a parallel passage for this similar narrative in 2 Chronicles 24. And by having both of them, we can kind of flesh out some of the details here. So 2 Chronicles 24 only mentions a census tax by Moses. Okay, you see that in the next verse. I believe that's verse 6. And so King Joash sees precedence for that Moses has a census tax. And he's right. When they were building the tabernacle in Moses' day, Moses said, hey, we're going to have a census tax. So everybody basically, once we take a census, everybody has to pay half a shekel. And that was the price. And they brought that, and that was for the initial building of the tabernacle, which was kind of a predecessor of now the temple. So he's right about that, and those funds were supposed to go to temple repairs and to building the temple, so that he's correct there. But in 2 Kings 12, Joash also says that you should be giving money from free will gifts. Also, if you want to give free will gifts to the temple repairs, that's also would be expected. If the people of their own free will are giving to the temple, they can give it to the temple or whoever they want. It's free will. They can do with their money what they want. So those two make sense. But the other one mentioned in 2 Kings 12 is the money of the holy things. So Joash is telling the Levites to go gather the money of the holy things and bring that for the temple as well. Well, if you look at what the holy offerings were and the holy monies, that was not supposed to go to the temple. That was supposed to go to the Levites and to the priests. They have to make a living somehow, and something has to support them. But now Joash is basically saying, okay, all three of these, money incomes need to go to the temple. You just rob the workers of their income. How are they going to support their families? How are they going to eat? How are they going to survive? Okay? So that is probably a lot of the reason why they are really hesitating here. And actually, 2 Kings 12 tells us it had been 23 years that nothing had happened. So it had been a long time since anything had happened. So as we look at danger signs of an apostate, he cuts corners to get what he wants. And here we can see that in the life of Joash in how he is doing something on the outside that makes him look really good, right? Like he's getting a lot of fame and popularity for initiating the restoration of the temple. Like the whole nation of Israel is going to love him, right? But in doing that, he's basically robbing the workers of the temple of their livelihood, and he's kind of cutting corners. So for our day, this is the leader who is more concerned about projects than people. And we see that sometimes in our workplaces or sometimes even a church. We've always got to be careful of being too task-oriented that we miss the people. This is the person who's really good at getting things done when it makes him look good. But when no one notices, they compromise. And we can feel that temptation of our own selves too. When everybody notices the project we're doing, then we put a lot of effort into it. But when no one's looking, the people that are working behind the scenes, Joash was kind of robbing them, and the things that nobody notices, we can kind of cut corners there. It's another sign, danger sign of an apostate. The third one is that he jumps to arrogant confrontation rather than humble investigation. Look with me at verses 6 and 7. So the king summoned Jehoiada the chief and said to him, "Why have you not required the Levites to bring in from Judah and Jerusalem the tax levied by Moses, the servant of the Lord, and the congregation of Israel for the tent of testimony? For the sons of Athaliah, that wicked woman, had broken into the house of God and had used all the dedicated things of the house of the Lord for the Baals." So here, Joash is confronting his mentor, Jehoiada. Like, what business does he have going arrogantly to Jehoiada and saying, like, what's your problem, basically? He's saying, confronting him in this arrogant pride and saying, what's going on here? Y'all are lagging, like, what's going on here? Now, if anybody is going to know what is going on and why the Levites might be hesitating, it's going to be Jehoiada, right? Like, he's the chief priest. Like, not only are the priests higher than the Levites, but he's the chief priest. So he's got the inside scoop. He knows what's going on here. And not only that, like, I mean, why isn't he going in just, appreciation for Jehoiada and just humbly going to him and like, hey, I know you all are interested in rebuilding the temple, so why is this not happening? Not to mention, too, that Jehoiada saved his life, protected him for 7 years, raised him. Jehoiada and his wife, Jehoshabeth, are actually his great uncle and aunt, so they're actually related by blood, too. Jehoiada killed a wicked woman who killed his family and tried to kill him. They set him up as king. They restored his father's line. I mean, think of how much Jehoiada has done for Joash. And now for Joash to turn around and be like, what's your problem, man? Like, I mean, he's got some arrogance, and this is another sign that his heart is not where it should be with the Lord. This is the person who has an obvious lack of respect and gratefulness for the leaders and influential mentors in his life. This may be somebody towards their parent. It could be somebody towards their boss. It could be somebody towards their spouse. Like, whatever that mentor or person in your life is, or maybe even authority who has given you so much, and then for somebody to turn around and disrespect them like that, it's a sign that they're going the wrong direction. Number 4, and the last one, under the influence of Jehoiada, under the right influence, he can still accomplish good. So Jehoiada really kind of helps him keep his toe to the line here and allows him to hold things together. Look with me at verse 8. I'll read several verses here. So the king commanded, and they made a chest and set it outside the gate of the house of the Lord. Notice as I read how much in this passage the phrases the king and Jehoiada show up, or they. This is no longer Joash acting of his own initiative. Now Jehoiada is helping him out, cluing him in to the fact that you need to provide for the Levites here, and together they are able to accomplish something great. So notice those phrases, the king and Jehoiada, or they. And proclamation was made throughout Judah and Jerusalem to bring in for the Lord the tax that Moses, the servant of the Lord, laid on Israel in the wilderness. And all the princes and all the people rejoiced and brought their tax and dropped it into the chest until they finished. And whenever the chest was brought to the king's officers by the Levites, when they saw that there was much money in it, the king's secretary and the officer of the chief priest would come and empty the chest and take it and return it to its place. Thus they did day after day and collected money in abundance. And the king and Jehoiada gave it to those who had charge of the work of the house of the Lord. And they hired masons and carpenters to restore the house of the Lord, and also workers in iron and bronze to repair the house of the Lord. So those who were engaged in the work labored, and the repair went forward in their hands, and they restored the house of God to its proper condition and strengthened it. And when they had finished, they brought the rest of the money before the king and Jehoiada, and with it were made utensils for the house of the Lord, both for the service and for the burnt offerings, and dishes for incense, and vessels of gold and silver. And they offered burnt offerings in the house of the Lord regularly all the days of Jehoiada. And that last phrase there in the end of verse 14 kind of bookends that first section. It starts by saying Joash was faithful all the days of Jehoiada. And now kind of ending this section, all the days of Jehoiada, they offered these right sacrifices. And Joash did some good things here. they succeeded in repairing the temple. This passage kind of outlines and details the whole process they went through. They no longer, actually in 2 Kings 12, it mentions specifically that the holy offerings, the ones that are supposed to go to the Levites, it says those went to the right place. That went to the Levites and the priests. So the Levites and priests are now on board, and they're able to make a proclamation and just communicate to the people that we're having this, and rather than the Levites showing up at the door and being like, hey, taxes, rather they're just saying, hey, people, bring your offerings to the temple. This is what we want to do. We want to restore the house of the Lord. The people get behind it, and they're rejoicing, and they're loving it. And they give more than enough, so much so that it says there that the temple was restored to its full condition. Not only that, but on top of that, they had money left over that they made utensils and all the items for the service of the temple. So that's what they were able to accomplish. Well, under the right influence, he can still accomplish good things. And this can look like a good Christian education. This can look like a moral upbringing, maybe even neat ministry opportunities. Somebody living in the right influence or with the right mentor, however that may look, they may be able to accomplish some really good things. But it doesn't necessarily mean that their heart was in it. It may be more of it may say more of their mentor and of what he accomplished than actually what he himself was able to accomplish. All right, that brings us then to the second half of the chapter, which is marked by influence of foolish peers. So whereas the first half was the influence of Jehoiada, this second half is the influence of foolish peers that Joash gets himself mixed up into. We're on the fifth danger sign, which is he replaces the positive spiritual influence of wise mentors with the negative influence of foolish peers. Look with me at verse 15. But Jehoiada grew old and full of days, and he died. He was 130 years old at his death, and they buried him in the city of David among the kings because he had done good in Israel and toward God and his house. Now after the death of Jehoiada, the princes of Judah came and paid homage to the king. Then the king listened to them. He's talking about King Joash. He's talking about the princes of Judah. If you'll remember, actually back in verse 10, these princes were mentioned before. These are part of the people that were giving to the temple and who were all excited about Joash and all the good things that he's doing. When Joash is popular and he's doing these good things, these princes kind of nudge their way in there and they want to be part of this, right? But now they're coming in the vacancy of Jehoiada, and they are trying to make their influence known. You'll notice in the whole second half of this chapter, now the word they is used. It's no longer just Joash, or it's no longer, the king Joash and Jehoiada. Now there's a different influence here. It talks about they. It's the princes of Judah and Joash. These are his spiritual influences. And it is a reality that spiritual influences do move on, don't they? I mean, kids graduate and move out of the house. It could be that parents even do pass away at some time. It could be a boss moves on. It may be just somebody in the church that moves on. It could be a good friend. It could be so many different things. These spiritual influences at all different stages of our life. We usually think of mentors, being more the older people and the people being mentored, the younger people, but we can all benefit from the Jehoiadas in our life and those spiritual influences. But when they move on, what is our reaction going to be to that? Are we going to stay faithful? We can. Spiritual influences are great, but we must remain faithful even in the absence of spiritual influence. This is exactly what happened to Rehoboam. If you remember Rehoboam, the story, he's the son of Solomon. He did the same exact thing. Once his dad Solomon was out of the picture, he listened to all the young, princes coming up and listened to their ideas and kind of started the kingdom going in the wrong direction. I think of Psalm 1 in this regard. Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the wicked, nor stands in the way of sinners, nor sits in the seat of scoffers. But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and on his law he meditates day and night. Think of also the popular verse, Proverbs 13:20. Whoever walks with the wise becomes wise, but the companion of fools will suffer harm. One significant danger sign here, and really a pivotal point and a turning point for Joash here, is the transition of spiritual influence in his life. He replaces the positive spiritual influence of Jehoiada with the negative influence of these princes, and that's a danger sign. Number 6, what he really loves will become obvious. Look at verse 18. Now it's talking about Joash and the princes, and they abandoned the house of the Lord, the God of their fathers, and served the Asherim and the idols, and wrath came upon Judah and Jerusalem for this guilt of theirs. Whereas before, remember verse 4, if you hop back over there, it says, after this, Joash decided to restore the house of the Lord. Now, looking at verse 18, it says that, where is it? They abandoned the house of the Lord, repairing the house of the Lord to abandoning the house of the Lord. He's now going a very different direction. His true colors are showing here. And what he loves is becoming obvious. So once out of the social pressure, they do what they want. Like once out of the social pressure to be good, and maybe a positive spiritual mentor in their life saying, hey, let's encourage you in the right way. Now he's kind of experiencing some freedom here. Maybe some of the pressure that he experienced from the Levites, the priests, maybe he got sick of them saying, we risk our lives for you, like you should do this. I don't know. I don't want to unfairly characterize them there. But there was a lot of pressure on him. So now maybe he's just spreading his wings a little bit, spreading his wild oats, and just trying to branch out here to have his own ideas rather than being in the shadow of Jehoiada. And once he does that, what he really loves becomes obvious. And for somebody who is starting to go that way, he's leaning towards apostasy, this is true of them. What they really love will become obvious, and they may rationalize that. They may say like, oh, I just made a mistake, but that's not really what I'm about, or oh, it's actually okay, like that's not really what I'm about, and there's all these different ways we can rationalize it. And I remember specifically a conversation with a guy in one of the dorm rooms when I was the dorm supervisor at Bob Jones, and he was doing this. He was giving me all these excuses and all these rationalizations as to why the direction of his life was actually okay. But I'll never remember, we were sitting down with the dean of men at that time, so he was in trouble. And the dean of men just looked at him and asked, he says, hey, what do you love? Like, that's the question here. We're not talking about, is this action okay or not? But let's cut to the chase here. Where's your heart? What do you love? And this young man had a tough time answering that question. All right, we're on to the 7th danger sign here. He stops heeding warnings and responds in anger to confrontation. So you're going to see there's kind of a dangerous progression here as we go through the danger signs. The heat is picking up. Things are getting worse. So look with me at verse 19. And now this is talking about God. Yet he, God, sent prophets among them to bring them back to the Lord. These testified them, but they would not pay attention. Then the Spirit of God clothed Zechariah, the son of Jehoiada, the priest, and he stood above the people and said to them, thus says God, why do you break the commandments of the Lord so that you cannot prosper? Because you have forsaken the Lord. He has forsaken you. But they conspired against him, that is Zechariah, and by command of the king, by the command of Joash, they stoned him with stones in the court of the house of the Lord. Thus Joash, the king, did not remember the kindness that Jehoiada, Zechariah's father, had shown him, but killed his son. And when he was dying, he said, may the Lord see and avenge. How sad that somebody would get to that point, that he would respond in that much anger to somebody questioning his direction of life, questioning his actions, that he would actually kill the son of Jehoiada, his spiritual mentor. He forgot all the good and the way that Jehoiada and the Levites risked their lives for him and saved his life and brought him, he's the reason that he's king, and they actually killed Joash at his command they stoned Zechariah, Jehoiada's son. And we should never underestimate how far our heart can take us. He was such a source of joy at first, and now he's such a source of pain. If you compare kind of the two episodes here, the first episode, he's rebuilding the temple, and everybody's getting behind him. It says the people rejoice. But now, the people see this, and they were not on board with this. He's now such a source of pain. They knew what Joash just did. We should never underestimate how far our heart can take us and how far we can go in anger, even if that's in response to confrontation or warnings. Well, several years ago, I was swimming in Monterey, California, and just a beach visit, and I was swimming. I was just out about 6 feet or so, and I'd been out for a little bit, swimming around, checking things out, and I tried to start swimming back to shore. And, I'm just swimming, and I realized I wasn't getting anywhere. Like, I was kind of stuck. So I just picked up the pace of my swimming, and I was a confident swimmer at this time, and I'm swimming as hard as I can, and I'm getting further and further out from the shoreline. I was caught in a mild riptide, and I was panicking. My worst nightmare is sharks. Okay, I hate sharks. Like my parents let me watch Jaws way too early. Okay, so every nightmare I had was sharks. So I'm just thinking in my mind, there's a shark right there, it's gonna eat me. So I'm freaking out. I'm just like swimming as hard as I can. Well, a lifeguard noticed, and one of my friends noticed, and they were able to pull me into safety, and it was fine. It was a very mild riptide, but it was scary, and I learned from that moment not to underestimate the power of the ocean. And just like that, we can't underestimate the power of our hearts. It may take us further than we ever wanted to go. Do you think Joash at this time thought he would ever kill the son of Jehoiada? Probably not. He didn't set out to do that, but his heart, at the influence of these foolish friends, caused him to do this. This is that person in our day who may have heeded warnings in the past, but now it hits them like water off a duck's back. It mentioned that about Joash. Like, God sent to him messengers and says, like, hey, come back to the Lord. But Joash just, doesn't even faze him. This is the person who responds in anger to anyone saying that what they are doing is wrong. All right, third one, danger sign number 8. He undermines all the good that he accomplished. Look at verses 23 through 27. We'll finish the chapter. At the end of the year, the army of the Syrians came up against Joash. They came to Judah and Jerusalem and destroyed all the princes of the people from among the people, and sent all their spoil to the king of Damascus. Though the army of the Syrians had come with few men, the Lord delivered into their hand a very great army, because Judah had forsaken the Lord, the God of their fathers. Thus they executed judgment on Joash. When they had departed from him, leaving him severely wounded, his servants conspired against him because of the blood of the son of Jehoiada the priest, and killed him on his bed. So he died, and they buried him in the city of David, but they did not bury him in the tombs of the kings. Those who conspired against him were Zabad, the son of Shimeath, the Ammonite, Jehozabad, the son of Shimrith, the Moabite. Accounts of his sons and the many oracles against him and of the rebuilding of the house of God are written in the story of the book of Kings, chapter 12, and Amaziah his son reigned in his place. So here's kind of a very sad ending to the story. The Syrians come in and just wipe out everything that they had accomplished, really. Even the repairing of the temple, some of that spoil that was taken away, that was right there. That was the repairs of the temple. They stripped the temple, and everything good that he tried to accomplish was just stripped away. Whereas before, first episode, you have so much good, constructive things going on, and now in the second episode, you have destruction. And compared to a legacy of honor that Jehoiada got, Jehoiada actually was buried among the kings. He was given honor. He was buried with a legacy of honor. Jehoiada, though he was a king, was not given the position of a king because the people saw through him. And how quickly this happened, and even I think of the story we started with Joshua Harris. Nobody reads his books anymore. All those books, everybody thinks of Joshua Harris as the guy who left the faith. They're not going to read his books anymore. What a bleak picture. Well, just in final application, Here I'd just like to mention especially 3 things. First off, just should we be doing this, okay? Maybe I should have asked this at the beginning. Should we even be doing this? Should we be looking for danger signs of somebody who is leaving the faith? Should we be looking at their lives this way? Isn't that judging them? That's often what they'll claim, right? If anybody confronts them, as Zechariah did, or these prophets from the Lord, that's often their first claim. Hey, stop judging me. Don't look at my life that way. Well, we have very biblical precedent to do that. Think of Matthew 7:15. Are grapes gathered from thorn bushes or figs from thistles? So every healthy tree bears good fruit, but the diseased tree bears bad fruit. A healthy tree cannot bear bad fruit, nor can a diseased tree bear good fruit. Every tree that does not bear good fruit is cut down and thrown into the fire. Thus you will recognize them by their fruits. And here in the New Testament, Jesus is teaching us that, hey, we do have to be careful of uncharacteristically judging somebody based off of externals too quickly. But when it comes to really knowing somebody, we can't see the heart. The only way that we can know is by seeing the fruits of their lives. We've got to look at their actions, and Jesus says this is how you know them. And finally, as far as diving into somebody's life, trying to rescue them, and being that kind of mentor, James 5, it ends on this note. My brothers, if anyone among you wanders from the truth, and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from his wandering will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. There could be so much great good if you can recognize these danger signs and step in. We all need that Jehoiada in our lives. And I just want to challenge you on the second note here to be that kind of spiritual influence. Be the Jehoiada for somebody else. From Titus 2, 1 through 11, we know that Paul is actually teaching here. This is the design of the church. The older men should mentor the younger men. The older women should mentor the younger women. There's this intergenerational mentoring and spiritual influence that must go on. That's how the church functions, and that's how it's designed. So let me put this out there as a challenge. Everybody in this room should be mentoring somebody. And if you're not, I would question you. Find somebody. Why aren't you? And try to be that Jehoiada in somebody's life. They could benefit so greatly. And finally, I just want to end by noticing the character of God here. His name isn't mentioned a whole lot in here. It talks about how it talks about his mercy and how he reached out and was not content just to let Joash go his own way, but he was reaching in by Jehoiada and warnings and bringing Zechariah. He's saying, come back, don't go that way. And so notice the mercy of God in reaching out. Notice also that God keeps his promises. God promised that the line of David would not cease, and sure enough, despite the negative outcome of this story, the line of David is restored, and God keeps his promises, and David has a continuing line that would continue until Jesus. And then I just want to encourage you on this last note that the plans of the Lord keep moving forward in spite of someone leaning towards apostasy. The plans of the Lord keep moving forward. So even if somebody in your life that you know, that maybe you're close to, has turned towards apostasy or has been leaning in that direction, the plans of the Lord continue. Despite the fact that Joash went the wrong way, God's plans move forward, and the line of David is restored, and God keeps that kingdom moving until eventually that would result in Jesus. He's the end of that. The only thing that Joash forfeited was the privilege to be part of those plans. So I would just ask us, are we going to be part of God's plans or not? They will keep moving forward. Will we be part of that? Let's close in prayer.